How many people do we have in there?
Hi, everyone, and welcome to our monthly webinar, Modernizing Your Business Processes with Power Platform. I'm Andreas Abitalil, Partner and Program Manager at MP Solution, and your moderator for the day. Our agenda is to cover modernizing your business processes by automating at scale, converting legacy systems, and identifying and automating repetitive tasks to improve efficiency and reduce costs. Before I hand you to today's presenter, I would like to mention our rules of engagement for this webinar. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on demand if needed. Please reach out to your partner or direct contact on the team to gain access to it. For questions, please leverage the Q&A feature in your top toolbar. We'll dedicate time at the end of this webinar to answer them. Our featured speaker for today's webinar is Joseph Kaloff, the president of MP Solutions. Joe, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Andreas. I appreciate it. Thank you for attending today's webinar, and I will go ahead and share my screen, and we will get going on the presentation. So the focus of today's webinar is the Power Platform. It's just a platform that Microsoft offers, but the idea here and the conversation is going to revolve around what is it that the Power Platform offers businesses to get them into the modern world, into modern automation, and into realizing a return on an investment and improve upon productivity. So let's talk about what the Power Platform is first. Go ahead, present. So the Power Platform is a collection of low-code and no-code tools that help businesses build apps, workflows, and other solutions. It is comprised of a number of artifacts within the platform. You're looking at them right here. It's Power Apps, Power Automate.
Joe, have you moved to the second slide because it doesn't show from our side?
Oh, it does not? Okay, let me make sure. Sorry about that. There you go. So it's a collection of low-code, no-code tools. They are all hosted on the Microsoft Cloud Platform. So most of these engines and most of these tools are actually in either M365 or in Azure. It's really irrelevant where they live. As far as the users are concerned, they are accessed from a single location, and they come with various artifacts. There's the Power Apps. There's Power Automate. Power BI is your reporting tool. And then Microsoft Dataverse is almost your storage, or where all your data can live, but doesn't necessarily have to live. What is the beauty of the Power Platform, and why do we believe that the Power Platform is actually a very robust and a powerful tool for all businesses? It introduces a true no-code, low-code solution. You do not need expertise. You do not need, as a business, to invest in developers. You do not need to manage code. All of the workflows, all of the automation, everything that you build, everything that you work on is either no code or very little code. And the little code or low code, what we refer to, is actually even when you really try to get extremely complex in building automation. That still is low code where you're not really writing custom code. The beauty of the Power Platform is that it inherently, without any additional work, it integrates with other Microsoft apps in the cloud. It connects to SharePoint, it connects to Teams, it connects to Dynamics, it connects to it connects to Azure services. If you're using Azure services like data services, SQL, whatever it is that you're using in Azure that's Microsoft native, it can connect to it. In addition, Microsoft for the past few years has realized that not all customers want to use some of the back-end products that Microsoft offers. So they have created, and there are a lot of ISPs that have worked on and created a lot of connectors to allow the front-end automation and the front-end engine to actually connect to third-party products on the back end. They're called connectors. Some of them are obviously free with the platform, and some of them, depending on who the back end is and who the provider is, are paid for. In addition, even though you can use existing storage like SharePoint, where you could store your data, or Teams, where you also store your data, and you get that storage for free from Microsoft. And when I say for free, obviously I'm referring to as part of your license, right? Nothing is free. Uh, you could also use the Power Platform, that license of the Power Platform, to actually leverage it for storage. If you have a scenario where you don't want to use SharePoint, or where you don't want to use Teams, or you don't want to use SQL, you could use Dataverse and some of the other storage artifacts that ship with the Power Platform. And we'll get to that in a little bit here. The Power Platform can also be separated in the environment to allow various people to build their own environments. In a large enterprise organization, in a Fortune 500, 1,000 company, where different departments within that company want to build their own automation, you could actually separate the environments to allow each department to have its own maybe citizen developers or its own experts. I use the term citizen developers because you don't need developers, you don't need traditional developers. You could actually elevate people within the organization to work on the platform because it is a low code, no code solution. So in a large organization, you could separate that so each department, each org can actually work on their own automation without affecting other parts of the organization. What that also allows for is actually IT to delegate those tasks so that IT does not have to be the bottleneck anymore, specifically in large organizations. Obviously, in smaller organizations, IT will more than likely always be involved in ensuring that whatever is being built is being managed by IT. But we have learned over the years that for larger organizations, sometimes IT just wants to delegate that. They don't want to be responsible for all the custom automation and business processes that exist within the various departments in that company. And finally, the beauty of the Power Platform is that while at first, and we see this all the time, while at first it could be a little bit intimidating for somebody that has never seen it to go work on it and build it and invent and innovate on the platform. It is a platform that allows citizen development. This is very important to remind all of your customers. Why? Development is not cheap. And we'll talk about this in a few slides. It's not only the development aspect, it's the maintenance and the sustainability and the maturity of your applications when you hire custom developers. What we see as a systems integrator and a solution provider is that we are able to go in and provide our customers the framework, or at least the baseline or even build the whole thing for them from beginning to end. But we don't necessarily, much to our obviously detriment, but it's fine. We don't necessarily have to stay in there and continuously manage those environments. Customers can actually elevate internal resources to allow them to manage that platform, to allow them to develop on top of that platform. They don't have to take existing resources and put them in training to become developers. They just have to get them familiar with the platform. This is a very, very important piece because one of the biggest complaints along the way when it comes to development is that it's just a never ending journey. And that's true. It is a never ending journey. But when you're talking to an organization that wants to embark on that never ending journey, they don't want it to be the never ending spend journey also. So they want to invest in potentially in the old days in a development team that comes and develops the application, but where they find themselves is in a situation where they are continuously just hemorrhaging money on that application to develop it and to bug fix it and to implement design changes and to modernize it. And the list goes on and on and on. With the Power Platform, that spend will decrease significantly because if you, for example, hire a solution provider to build the application for you, you don't have to necessarily keep that solution provider as a CFO or as an IT director or a VP of IT. You don't necessarily have to keep that solution provider on the payroll, if you will, or in a contract indefinitely for them to manage whatever they built for you. You could actually scale them back and allow your internal resources to manage the lightweight changes to the application, and then bring them back potentially every once in a while when there are big significant changes that need to happen. And this is really the sales pitch of the Power Platform is that you could finally um, develop applications internally without getting stuck in the never-ending loop of having to pay developers and having to get into contracts that force you to make these that force you to get into them so you could make these changes time and again. So let's talk about the scenarios. Where are we seeing the scenarios of, and we're seeing them across the board, but I'm starting from the most to the least, right? Where do we see the most scenarios of customers coming to us and saying, yes, I do have interest in leveraging the Power Platform? The most common scenario is what we call legacy conversions and the Office application legacy conversions specifically. What does that mean? For 90% of our customers, for most customers that are mature customers that have been in business for a long time, we see time and again the infiltration of the Office applications, Excel, Access, and Word. Specifically, Excel is, I have them listed in order. Excel is the biggest offender. And when I use the term offender, I'm not trying to beat up on Excel. It's actually a great thing, but it is the application that is mostly and used to automate processes, to help um, different departments or different users uh, uh, improve upon their work to make it a little more seamless. And where do we see that when it comes to Excel, Access, and Word? And again, specifically Excel the most, and then Access is Visual Basic for applications. I cannot recall a single customer that we haven't done business with where through our partners, where the customer did not have at least one, more times than not, it's more than one, but at least one Excel workbook that has enormous amount of VBA code that provide enormous amount of value. But that VBA code is strictly that. It's code. It's somebody that sat down and wrote Visual Basic to automate tasks, to automate processes, to improve the lives of all of those around them, all of their peers, all of their reports, and it is a good thing. The problem is that you are being held as a hostage to the code. And what that means is that you're being held hostage to that developer that wrote the code. And even if you're not, what we see more times than not, because VBA has been in office for decades, literally since 1995. VBA has existed in Excel since 1995, and it is being leveraged and used extensively since 1995. So you can imagine the amount of code that has been written out there. What happens is that these users, because the code is confined to the application, these users that have either learned the code or became experts at the code and wrote the code have more times than not moved on, and the business is left what I call hostage to that code. If something breaks in the code, there's nobody to update the code because nobody in the organization has written the code. It's somebody that left the company. If there's an update to Office, sometimes it could break the code. The example I would give you, we have a customer that has a lot that runs almost their business on Access. They have invested in VBA code for years, and the code is so specific to their need, and it's really very mature. It's been developed for literally over 21 years, and it will not run on 64-bit Access because there are references in the code that require certain libraries that require 32-bit. Microsoft has deprecated some of these libraries in 64-bit Access. The application does not run on 64-bit Access. So we have to kind of hold them back and let them run legacy bitness, if you will, so that they can run that application. At some point, Microsoft might no longer invest in compiling and selling 32-bit Access. That renders that customer completely dead in the water because their application does not run on 64-bit. And the developer that wrote that code is long gone. They have left the company. They left the company 8 years ago. So for the last 8 years, they've been running it in the hope that nothing will break. And if something breaks, they are definitely going to be in a world of hurt. That's where the Power Platform can actually take that over. Why would you move from the Office applications? For the scenario I provided. 2, you're getting away from code, no longer being held hostage to the VBA code that some individual wrote. 3, one of the most important pieces of this, specifically when we talk about Office, when you move to the Power Platform, you move to a single source of truth, to a single source of data. I'm going to give a scenario. When you are working on an Excel workbook, your data resides in that Excel workbook. If that Excel workbook goes to somebody else and that person makes changes and does not share these changes with you and anybody else that's using that Excel workbook, now you have 2 disparate pieces of Excel workbooks. The data is no longer the single source of truth. And we see that all the time. Even though Microsoft 365 has made that extremely more robust, because now you could potentially save all of these workbooks in SharePoint and leave them up in SharePoint. That way everybody accesses the same file and can co-author in the same file. We still see a lot of scenarios where customers are, for example, sharing these workbooks that have a lot of VBA in email. And one person opens the workbook, makes changes, shares it with another person, but not the third person. And as you can imagine, this becomes extremely complicated, extremely fast. And now you no longer know what's the last version and whose version is actually the truth. And then you end up in a situation where you have to actually consolidate that data, which is even more work. And finally, the beauty of the Power Platform is that with a low-code, no-code solution, you're actually implementing a true web application, a true client-server model, a front end, that's your web, That's your Microsoft 365. That's your Dynamics 365. You are browsing to a web location to be able to interact with that application. And the back end is your single source of truth. And we'll talk about what that back end could be in a little bit. It could be SQL, it could be SharePoint, it could be any other, it could be Dataverse, it could be any other back end that is supported, and there's plenty of them out there by the Power Platform, but it's one single back end, one shared data source. And finally, as you could see here, the beauty of the Power Platform, the question comes up, okay, so you develop the Power Platform, and then what? Whomever did not develop those automations and those applications of the Power Platform, people that weren't even involved in that development phase, can easily take ownership of these applications and onboard and learn how to update those applications because of the citizen development phenomena, which is it does not take somebody a year to learn how to write VBA, to learn how to use the Power Platform. To learn how to write VBA is an undertaking. You are learning how to code, how to literally write source code. That is definitely not the case with the Power Platform. It's all plug and play. It's no code solutions. It's a lot of drag and drop widgets and artifacts. And you could get any individual within your organization that has the interest and the desire to be able to learn it in no time. So what is the next thing that we're seeing as far as conversion? The next one is just your traditional application conversion. While that's not necessarily as prevalent at our customers or at your customers, also you will see that as the Office applications, right? You will more times than not run into customers that have definitely leveraged Office as their automation tool, Excel and Access, than they have really invested in a custom application. But there are a lot of customers that have invested in custom applications to run and automate certain tasks in the business. Those custom applications can cover the gamut. What I've listed here are the ones that we run into the most. Python historically was and I can't answer why, but Python is definitely the language that has been used quite often to automate business processes. And as a Microsoft partner, the one we run into the most, obviously, is .NET. And .NET has been around for a very long time, so we run into some serious legacy .NETs from 2001 all the way to more modern custom .NET applications that were built 6, 7, 8 years ago. So not that long ago. And when it comes to .NET, we run into two different types of applications. We run into the web application that is actually a lot more modern, meaning you still have a web interface, just like you would with the Power Platform, and you have a back end. That is an easier model to convert because it still adheres to that client server web data source model. But we sometimes also run into what we call the thick client or the desktop applications, which is your traditional application that a customer hired a developer to write, and the application is installed locally on the device. It's the typical, I double click on it, it either runs, or I double click on it and it runs setup, and then now I have an application on my desktop. I click on start and I go use that application. The desktop applications are definitely more complex to convert to the Power Platform because now you're moving them from a desktop to a web MVC model, what we call, view controller model. And why do customers want to get away from these applications? And why do we encourage them to get away from these applications? Not because they're not providing the business value, but because 90% of the time, when we walk in and talk to customers about their applications, they cannot tell us where the latest repository of the source code is located. We ask them, who wrote the code? some guy that used to work here or some guy that already still works here, right? Where is the code? I don't know. Is it on the individual's desktop? Maybe. Let's go talk to them. If we could talk to them, if they are still working at the company. So now you're also held hostage again to a source repository that if you create an update, if something breaks in the application, you cannot fix it. If we cannot find the source code, we cannot fix it. You are dead in the water. You have to be able to manage that code. That is not the case when we move to the Power Platform because you're barely managing any, if any, you're not managing any code. So the idea is, unless you are a mature business development shop, even though you might not be a software provider, but you are a business that has a true software development department with developers that adhere to development methodologies and store the source code in a repositories in true source safe repositories, you are pretty much putting yourself at risk of that application breaking at any given time, whether it's a .NET update or whether it's a server update, whatever that might be, and you not being able to fix it at all, and it'll just die on you. And we have run into situations where customers just could not answer the question. Literally, the application just died overnight, and the application is running their business. This is not a situation any customer wants to be in. And this is why it's important to start thinking about the investment of moving these custom applications, whether they're Python or it doesn't matter what they are, what language they're written in, that's completely irrelevant. But moving these applications that were written by a developer, where the source code is your intellectual property, move them over to the Power Platform to where, again, you go to a low code, no code solution, just like moving Office, there's no difference. We're moving to the Power Platform. You can retain the data source. What that means is, and let me speak to this a little bit. If we are moving a web application from a .NET framework over to the Power Platform, we don't necessarily have to migrate the data. If that .NET application relied on SQL Server on the back end, that's not a problem. We leave the back end alone. We still leverage that same exact data source, that SQL Server, except now your front end, your business process workflow and automation is not a .NET custom application. It's just the Power Platform pulling the levers and doing all the tasks in an automated way for you. We can extend the Power Platform with connectors. That's the beauty of connectors. And let me speak to that a little bit. We have run into customers, you will run into customers where the back end could potentially be a third-party data source. It could be Oracle. It could be NetSuite. It could be Workday. It could be any sort of back end where you are interacting and manipulating and working and leveraging the data. Historically, in a custom applications, you actually have to write these connections to these backends. That's no longer the case with the Power Platform. Why? Because the majority of these vendors, the Oracles of the world, the PostgreSQL of the world, the NetSuites of the world, the ServiceNow of the world, they have provided connectors specifically for the Power Platform, where they are telling their customers, if you want to come and interact with our data through the Power Platform, we're going to provide you a connector. They're encouraging you, they're making it simpler for you to interact with their data using the Power Platform. Workday is a great example that we have done in the past. That we go in and we use the Power Platform to interact with that identity or HR data, and we leave the data in Workday. We're not making changes to the Workday data, even though we can, but we're leveraging that data using the Power Platform to run the business down at the various organizational levels. And finally, the question comes up often, and it's a legitimate question. Can it do everything? Well, We'll get to that in a little bit, but I could tell you this. If I was delivering this webinar 4 years ago, I could just say no right now and move to the next slide. To answer the question of can it do everything. Today, the maturity of the Power Platform has allowed, and that's why we use the term low code sometimes, not just no code, low code, because you could still develop on top within, but on top of the Power Platform to implement features that might not be inherent to the Power Platform. Meaning, if there are certain actions you want to do or certain events you want to do that the Power Platform cannot do out of the box, you still can leverage JavaScript to write within that Power Platform application to augment it and allow it to do certain things that it cannot do. So extensibility is definitely becoming more and more prevalent within the platform, so that the potential of you not being able to do something is becoming less and less. And Power FX is also another language that you can use in the Power Platform that actually looks very similar to Excel, believe it or not, to allow the Power Platform to replace or not necessarily replace, but provide parity between the things and the functions and the formulas that a lot of customers used to write in Excel, leveraging that engine. And now you could do that in the Power Platform to mimic the behavior and the power of Excel functions and formulas. And finally, the beauty of this is if you convert your application, if you convert it to a Power Platform, you can transfer ownership without having to worry about storing source repositories. In addition, if you can mature on the Power Platform to leverage what we call ALM, which is an application lifecycle management, right? And what application lifecycle management means is that you could store all of these things that you're building in the Power Platform in Azure DevOps. You could still treat it, if you wish, you could still treat it as a custom application, except that now you're no longer having to manage code. And if you look at the GitHub Actions, there's a community of developers out there that are building actions to improve upon the Power Platform and putting them out there for everybody to use. So you can definitely and easily leverage the community to be able to deliver on some of the automation that you want without having to build it yourself or customize it yourself. So the final piece is net new. What net new means is, how do we convince our customers to actually build a Power Platform or to automate using the Power Platform without having to bring it from another application or Excel? Net new means I have a business process today. It is manual. It is a form that I fill out. It is an email that I send out. It is a bunch of people talking to each other, calling each other. Can you do this? Can you do that? How do I automate this? To encourage your customers to build net new, to truly automate their business processes that are extremely manual today, we like to take sort of the baby steps approach, the crawl, walk, run model, which is, first of all, identify a process within your business that you would like to automate. And how do you identify them? There's a lot of processes. Any business, small businesses, teeny tiny businesses have ungodly amount of processes. How do we identify a process? I would score them. We have a model where we would score the process. And scoring the process obviously requires a business analyst, but sometimes you could have your customer do that on their own and give them the template to score it, and we'll be more than happy to provide it. Scoring it means, how many steps is that business process? How many people does it touch? How often do we do it, right? Put a number from 1 to 5 on that. How complex is the process? Is it linear? Is it non-linear? Is it just, it goes from Joe to Andreas to Bob to Jim and we're done? Or if Jim does something, it has to come back to Joe. And if Andreas does something, it bypasses Jim. What is the complexity of that process? If you score it, then you could make a decision, a financial decision on what is the cheapest process I could automate, right? From hiring a solution provider to automate it for me, and what is the return on my investment? And finally, the important piece is that actually sort of trumps all of this is it going to be adopted? This needs to happen in an organization within the company or at a department within the company that is willing to adopt this business process automation and use it so they can evangelize it across the organization and allow the others to see the value, allow other departments. If HR is doing it, you want accounting to be envious and to want to come back and say, I want to automate my processes. I want to be a little more efficient when it comes to that. So finally, how do we get ready for the Power Platform? Well, you have to do a lot of things before you get ready for the Power Platform. And those things don't need to be done just to get ready for the Power Platform. They're more holistic. Readiness for the Power Platform to us means move to M365, ensure that you are modernized when it comes to your unstructured data. If you're trying to automate things that involve moving files around, you want to automate that in SharePoint or in Teams, right? You don't want to try to automate that in, even though you might already be automating that on traditional legacy file shares, but you're probably using Python or a .NET app to do that, or some scripting, some local scripting to do that. To do that in the Power Platform, move your unstructured data, get your data in order up in SharePoint and Teams, right? To convert from Excel or Access, to get ready for that, what we suggest is convert that data, convert your Excel data, the sheet, the data that's sitting in a worksheet or the data that's sitting in an Access database. You need to convert that data from local data, local meaning in Excel or in Access, to Microsoft lists. So we could interact with that data, again, as I mentioned earlier, as a single source of truth. And finally, for large data sets, as I mentioned earlier, you could leave that data set alone. If it's an Oracle data set or if it's a NetSuite data set, you could leave it alone. There's nothing to do to get ready. You just go ahead and leverage the connector. Or if you're using, for example, very, very large data sets across numerous Excel workbooks and Access databases, then you could definitely move that to what we call, which is part of the Power Platform, Dataverse. And Dataverse is simply a term for large data sets that you want to take out of Microsoft simple data storage, which is Microsoft lists would be considered a simple data set. So where do we start? Where can you start with your customers to talk to them about, hey, let's modernize, let's automate our business processes using the Power Platform? And when we do migrations, the first thing we do is we ask our customers, and that's always the case, to inventory their Excel workbooks and Access databases for any automation that's built in there. And I would suggest that 99.9, if not 100% of the time, there is at least one workbook or Access DB, either or, where automation exists. Go ahead and inventory them and understand which ones are the perfect candidates using the scoring method that I mentioned in my previous slide. Inventory traditional Windows applications, inventory on-premises applications, web applications running against, IIS on a server in a server room. And then finally, the one thing I didn't touch on, because this can get very complicated and I don't want to, it'll take way more than an hour to discuss this. A lot of our customers are finally now coming to us and saying, we have a lot of shadow apps that IT is not aware of. We have a really, really smart guy in accounting. He's just like very loves programming. And he wrote an application for accounting that makes their life easier. And now if we do any migrations, everything's going to break. Shadow apps are extremely important to inventory and identify and flag for whether they are and should be candidates to move to a more modern solution like the Power Platform. And finally, this is probably for more of a long-term vision, is survey for non-managed apps. What that means is that there are individuals within organizations that build automation only for themselves, only for themselves. I'm a huge offender. I do this all the time, and I realize that is the wrong thing to do. If I am investing time in building automation to make my job easier for business continuity reasons, for scalability reasons, I should take that innovation, that automation innovation, and I should be able to hand it over to a team that allows that to scale so that the rest of my organization and the rest of my company can benefit from that automation. And this is the last of my slides. That's really it. I will hand it back to Andreas.
One of the points, Joe, that you were discussing, the non-managed apps from your perspective that I faced in my day-to-day workflow is because we got Power Automate desktop app, I started leveraging that, and even our IT team has insight into it, so they can leverage it as well. Because our IT team manages the whole environment of Power Automate, that's also interesting to investigate.
That is actually a very good point. I contemplated talking about the Power Apps and Power Automate for desktop, but that goes into a complete separate can of worms. I'll cover it in a minute here. The Power Platform or the engine, not the platform, because the platform is hosted in M365 and Dynamics. The engine itself actually is available to run on your local machine in silo, on your laptop, on your desktop. And you can automate those processes locally for yourself. The beauty of that, and the reason that was a decision by Microsoft to do it that way, is because the more you encourage your users to do that, the more IT has insight into what each individual is doing. And then over time, they can bubble that up to the top to where now you could start making informed decisions on what your users are automating and provide it holistically to all of the organization. But if I write a JavaScript or a VB script that runs on my desktop to automate something, IT is never going to have insight into that. And I, for not for selfish reasons, but for time reasons, I'm never going to share that with my team. I just wrote it to automate my own processes. So that's definitely a very valid point, and potentially something we could discuss in a separate webinar about the beauty of the Power Platform engine running locally on your desktop.
Even from an analytics point of perspective, they were able to see those actions and work on less recurring manual tasks and more automation on an organization level.
Absolutely, absolutely. You are unintentionally educating your IT department or those people that have insight. You're educating them as to what is relevant within the company. You're doing it by just automating locally. And I think I don't know if we're gonna open it up for questions, Andreas, or
Yep. Just before we go into it, we want to thank you for the wonderful presentation, and I would like to share with the attendees that they can benefit from a special promotion. As you can see on the screen, we're offering a discount on our application modernization assessment till the end of November. So please reach out to your account executive or to your partner for more details. And let's open the floor for Q&A. Let me check. I believe we have already a question. Great presentation. Thank you. I would be interested in a one-page outline on Power Platform and the application conversation ALM net new readiness parts of the presentation. It's fine if it's branded with the AMPI logo, etc. And we will share it with you. David, I will reach out to you offline, or I will let somebody from the team reach out to you, and we will go more into details with you. If you have any question, please leverage the Q&A feature on the top of your toolbar so we can discuss it.
So I see a question here that reads, how would you decide what app to start first? So from a consulting perspective, in all fairness, it all depends on who's sitting across the table, the audience, who is interested in doing that. In my professional opinion, what we see is that we would want to focus on what application have you lost control over. And usually, more times than not, and that is a business critical application. Usually, and more times than not, it's the custom application phenomena that keeps IT people up at night, which is we run the business on an app, the developer is long gone. If that app goes down, we are going to be in a world of hurt. And we have nobody with any insight to the code. And that is where I would start. The business criticality is the most. And I say this because we have had this happen literally about 3 or 4 times in the past 4 years, where we are brought in to a fire drill. The app is down. We have never seen the app. We don't know what the app does. It's a brand new customer, went through a partner. The partner reached out to us. We jumped in. The business is at almost a complete stop. And there's no way we could help them within 24 hours because we have to get familiar with the app. That is where I would start. Business criticality.
Our other question, what licensing is required and who all needs that license?
So yeah, so just to be transparent here, we're not a licensing partner, so we're not experts, but we could definitely refer you to some of our partners that are. By default, you do get Power Platform or licenses to run Power Automate and Power Apps. You get that as part of your Microsoft 365 license. So you could definitely get going without buying anything extra. With that being said, there are limitations to what is it that you can get going. And what that really means is
I believe we lost Joe. Joe, are you back with us?
I think I'm back. Am I back? Yep. Sorry about that. So the limitations are, as far as the Power Platform is concerned, if you're using it as part of your E3 or E5 license, is, for example, how many actions are being utilized. Every time I click on something that runs some automation, right? That's an action. So Microsoft caps that. They don't want you to build a enterprise-sized application where 50,000 users are using it, using their E5 license or their E3 license. So there are certain limitations, but if you reach out to us, Alan, we'll be more than happy to refer you to some of our licensing partners and go through the details of what it takes. But with that being said, you can get going today. If you're in Microsoft 365, there's a very good chance you could get going small without purchasing anything extra.
And in some cases, one user from an IT perspective can elevate their licenses and not have everybody who's using the app or the automation elevate that license. They would just buy that license for a services account or one of the IT or developers team to get going. For custom apps with managed code, is there a tool to assess a migration path?
Yeah, the tool would be a consultant. Unfortunately, the answer is no. You can't. It's because for a number of reasons, and I'm not really sure if there is anything on the roadmap to invest in that. I know that there are some third-party providers that have some sort of a tool. In all fairness, um, it will require a consultant. It requires somebody to come in, analyze the application, analyze what the application does, not worry as much about the source code. You're not going to have somebody come and read the sources. That's not that important. But analyze what the application does and then convert that into a Power Platform development methodology, low code, no code development methodology. So it definitely would require a human being to do that.
I don't believe we have any questions anymore. I'll just give them 10 seconds in case somebody wants to post a new question. In the time being, I want to share with everybody our upcoming webinar in November 16th, Unlocking the Full Potential, Your Journey to SharePoint Maturity. We'll be discussing the platform in general and go into certain specific cases. And that would be all for today. Thank you all for joining. Thank you, Joe, and have a great end of day.
Thank you.